Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be discussing the social risk. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com, where you can, of course, get access to charts like the social risk. The social risk is something that we've been tracking here at Into the Cryptoverse for a number of years. And one of the reasons why the social risk can be so interesting is because, first of all, it can help identify market cycle tops, as you can see on the chart. But I think it also is very useful in identifying when everyone's favorite topic, alt season, actually occurs. Now, over the last 3 years, there have, of course, been a lot of arguments about alt season and if we were in alt season or if we were not. And I think a lot of people mistakenly point towards alt USD pairs to identify when they think alt season is occurring. But in the cryptoverse, it is my opinion that alt season occurs only when Bitcoin dominance aggressively goes down after a major parabolic Bitcoin rally. The reason why it makes sense to think about alt season through the lens of Bitcoin dominance is because if the altcoin market is going up, but it's underperforming Bitcoin, then that's hardly altcoin season, right? That's Bitcoin season. And the altcoins are just catching a ride. If altcoins are going up while Bitcoin is going nowhere, that is alt season, right? That is alt season. And you can actually really clearly identify alt season on the Bitcoin dominance charts. And the reason we're talking about this is because the social risk helps us identify if alt season is actually occurring or if it's just another premature call. So if you were to go over to the Bitcoin dominance chart, I've highlighted 4 different regions. This yellow region here was in 2017. And then this one here was in 2021. You can see in both cases, Bitcoin dominance aggressively fell after a Bitcoin USD rally. The blue regions that I've highlighted, this is Bitcoin season, right? This is when Bitcoin dominance goes up no matter the direction of Bitcoin USD. You've probably heard me say that a few times over the last several years. Now in 2022, Bitcoin dominance went up while Bitcoin USD went down. In 2023, Bitcoin dominance went up while Bitcoin USD went up. And in 2024, Bitcoin dominance went up while Bitcoin USD went up. So you can see that the alt seasons that people keep calling for, where Bitcoin dominance aggressively drops after a parabolic Bitcoin rally, you can see that that actually hasn't occurred, right? Here's January 2022. And throughout this entire process, 3 years almost, Bitcoin dominance has really never stopped going up. And this has tricked a lot of people into prematurely calling for alt season because they see altcoins doing well on their USD pairs. But little do they know, a lot of these alts are actually bleeding against Bitcoin. So the social risk is something that is very useful in helping to identify if alt season is actually occurring. Look at 2021 and 2017. All right. So in 2021, you can see that the social risk really started to go up just before 2021, right? In October of 2020, it really started to go up. And it continued to go up even in early 2021. And you can see that as the social risk went up, obviously it was going up while Bitcoin was rallying, but it essentially led to alt season in the post-halving year where alts durably outperformed Bitcoin. Now, if you look at 2017, you'll see something very similar, right? The social risk was really, really low, and it was still low even as late as December. But then in 2017, the social risk really started to move up. We have not seen that this cycle, right? We have not yet seen that. We've seen rallies by the social risk. Don't get me wrong. We've seen plenty of rallies by it, but you can see that every single rally by the social risk didn't actually lead anywhere. And I think that is what's caused people to bleed the Satoshi valuation of their portfolio by sitting in a lot of altcoins while Bitcoin dominance just kept on going up. The social risk helped identify whether alt season was going to occur or not. And every single rally by Bitcoin, the minute it stopped, the social risk just went back down, right? So one of the reasons is because the Bitcoin rally did not last long enough to really bring that euphoria back to the cryptoverse. It lasted a little bit of time to turn some eyes, right? To turn some heads, but it didn't last long enough to really bring retail investors back. And so what I think people should look at for the rest of this year, and especially going into 2025, is, do we actually see the social risk go back up? Do people actually come back to the cryptoverse? Now, one of the ways to view this is to figure out what actually makes up the social risk, right? And it's 5 different things, and it's these 5 things right here. YouTube subscribers to crypto YouTube channels, views to crypto YouTube channels, new followers to analysts on X or Twitter that run crypto accounts, exchanges on Twitter, and layer ones on Twitter. That's what it's made up of. And to give you an idea of what any individual one of those looks like, here is an example of YouTube, of views to crypto YouTube channels, right? And what you'll notice is that in 2021, these channels collectively at one point were averaging around 4 million views per day collectively. But ever since 2022 began, these channels have been averaging around 1 million views a day with occasional spikes, right? Occasional spikes to 2 million. You see that? Occasional spikes to 2 million. But all in all, they averaged around 1 million views per day. And now we are in another spike, right? So there are some retail investors coming back. You can see that here in the social risk, right? You can see it, this spike right here. Do you see the spike we had back over here in March where it went almost to 2 million? If you go and look at YouTube, if you go look here at the social risk, you can see that's right when it was hitting this top over here, was right in March, and then a little bit later in April as people, continued to watch and follow new people on Twitter. But it ultimately just led to, it did not bring retail back. And that, I think, has been one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people have made this cycle. And I by the way, I've made plenty of mistakes myself. Let me be clear. But I think that's been one of the biggest mistakes that people have made this cycle, and why they sort of prematurely perhaps converted their Bitcoin to altcoins. In most cases, there are some alts that have outperformed Bitcoin, so I'm not referring to your alt, of course. But everyone else's alt, right? Everyone else who converted their Bitcoin to alts, their altcoins, mostly underperformed Bitcoin, right? They didn't pick the altcoin you picked that went up. So in this case, it makes sense to really study this to see, will people come back to the cryptoverse, right? Is this just another high, like sort of a one-off top, or does it lead to sustained interest in the cryptoverse? Remember, one of the things I've said for the last several years is that Bitcoin dominance should go down in the post-halving year. All right, so 2025. Now, we're only a month and a half away from that, right? So it's not that far away. So I guess the question, right? The question is, will retail actually stay? Now, if they do stay, that doesn't necessarily mean that Bitcoin dominance immediately has to top out. It could. And honestly, I do think there is a chance that dominance tops around 60%. 60% has been my target on Bitcoin dominance for the last several years, right? I've said, hey guys, I think it's going to go to approximately 60%, give or take, right? Give or take. The reason it makes sense to be open-minded to dominance going up a little bit more is we can see that last cycle in December of 2020, of the halving year, Bitcoin dominance did get one final rally into the end of the halving year, and then the early part of the post-halving year. So I think that is a clear thing that happened on the chart. And if you look at alt Bitcoin pairs, you can see, in fact, that in November of 2020, they got a very similar rally, right? Where they rallied for a few weeks, and then at the very end in December, alt Bitcoin pairs then sold off one final time. And that was already while the social risk was going up, right? So basically, what I think you argue in that case is there was some level of social divergence, right? You had a metric where Bitcoin dominance went to a higher high while the social interest was going to higher highs, showing us that Bitcoin dominance was likely about to make an abrupt turn the other direction, right? And that's actually something that really, was difficult to sort of predict last cycle. Was that final drop by alt Bitcoin pairs, because it seemed like they already had bottomed, right? It seemed like alt season should already be occurring and that alts should be durably outperforming Bitcoin. But then they got one final drop against Bitcoin. This is not against the US dollar, right? This is against Bitcoin. They got one final drop against Bitcoin when everyone was not expecting it. And so I just want to put that on your radar for this cycle too, because I was largely unprepared for it last cycle. And it doesn't have to play out in the same exact way. I don't want to give that impression. With Bitcoin dominance at 60%, my maxi hat is off. I already think diversification makes sense. There are going to be more and more altcoins that probably start to outperform Bitcoin. But I do distinctly remember this rally by alt Bitcoin pairs in November of 2020. And you can see that they topped out on November 24th, right? So that would be exactly a week from now. And then from November 24th until the very early part of January, we saw Bitcoin dominance go back up and we saw alt Bitcoin pairs crash one final time, even though the social risk at that point was putting in a higher high, right? You can see the social risk in late November is exactly where it was. I mean, today, it's exactly where it was in late November, right? There was just one final dip by the social risk in December. You see that? There was one final dip by social risk in December. All Bitcoin pairs sold off. They went to a new low. And then Bitcoin dominance finally topped. So be open-minded to that outcome. And the reason I say all this, right, is because one of the most difficult things to do in the cryptoverse is to preserve the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio, right? It's, if you think about your portfolio in terms of its Satoshi valuation rather than its USD valuation, then it makes navigating the cryptoverse so much easier, right? That is what helps keep you from riding an altcoin down 95% against Bitcoin. There's a lot of altcoins that bottomed against the US dollar a long time ago, but they keep putting in new lows against Bitcoin almost every single week. And remember, every dollar you put in an altcoin is a dollar you're not putting in to Bitcoin. So there is some opportunity cost there. So if you're going to take on the risk of the altcoin market, you want to have a pretty good idea if it's going to outperform Bitcoin or not. Because if you think it's not going to outperform Bitcoin, then why not just put it in Bitcoin? Because it's a lower risk and it's giving you a pretty decent return over the last few years, right? If you put it in an altcoin instead, you're basically saying, all right, I want to take on more risk and you're going to seek more reward. That's why we spend a lot of time talking about Bitcoin dominance on this channel, is because I think at any given point, it makes sense to figure out, is this investment in, Ethereum or an altcoin, is it likely to outperform Bitcoin over the investing time frame that I'm interested in, or is it likely not going to do that? And if we think, if we get to the point where we're looking at the social risk and it looks like it's really moving up, if it looks like it's really moving up and sustaining that uptrend, then it's more likely that we see Bitcoin dominance go down. But it's not clear yet, right? I mean, look, guys, everyone wants it at this point, right? It's been years. Everyone's been prematurely calling for alt season for years. But at the end of the day, I think it makes the most amount of sense to stick with the data, right? Rather than predict what is going to happen, just stick with the data, right? I'm not saying, right, to not be diversified. Obviously, there's a lot of altcoins that are doing pretty well right now. What I'm saying is it can make sense to be open-minded to the actual start of something like alt season, because every single rally by the social risk this year didn't go anywhere. It's certainly possible that it goes somewhere this time. I think a lot of that is going to depend on how long Bitcoin can sustain the current rally. If Bitcoin can continue to sustain the rally through the end of the year, right? If Bitcoin can essentially follow what it did in 2020, right? If you go, or 2016, right? If you go look at year-to-date ROI of Bitcoin in 2024, if it can just sustain this like it did in 2020, 2016, and 2012, then there's a good chance you will see some form of alt season in the post-halving year, right? A month and a half from now. If it doesn't sustain it and it just sort of falls off again, then you still might not yet get that influx of new viewers. Now, as an investor, you're like, well, how do I sort of make sense of that? As I've said for the last 3 years, right, the best strategy is just to remain Bitcoin heavy until Bitcoin dominance has signs of topping out. Because it's already hit my target of 60%, I do think it makes sense to hedge, right? And I've said that. I do. I'm not holding on to that belief any longer. I did take off the maxi hat that I told you guys I put on back in early 2022. But that doesn't yet mean that the top for dominance is definitely in. There's always a chance it goes higher. My argument is this: if Bitcoin dominance is going to go higher, it will do so within the next, say, 6 to 7 weeks, right? 6 to 7 weeks. I think a week or two ago I said 8 weeks. So 6 to 7 weeks, if it's going to go higher. Bitcoin dominance, that is. It's possible that it's already topped out. It certainly is. But, when you look at stuff like dominance without stablecoins, normally when you get these, in these post-halving year, or sorry, in the halving years, dominance goes up in December, right? I mean, really starting in December, dominance starts to go up. And again, if you look at all Bitcoin pairs, yes, they're moving right now. They're up over 2% today. And the day, is only a few hours old from when I'm making this video. But again, we also saw a similar rally in 2020 where they rallied back on up and then they ultimately crashed out, right? If you look at the low to the top there, it was basically a 45% rally. If you look at this one, it hasn't been nearly that big, right? It hasn't been 45% from this low, but it has been, 15%, right? But the fascinating thing is this rally by alt Bitcoin pairs is right up to this prior level that once upon a time acted as support, right? And now it's sort of turned potentially here into resistance. Now, if alt Bitcoin pairs can get, I would say, 2 weekly closes above their bull market support band going into the end of the year, right? If they can get a couple weekly closes up here, then maybe they don't have to sell off one final time. Again, I am open-minded to the top for dominance being in because my target of 60% has been hit. But I just don't want people to think there is no risk of alts selling off to Bitcoin once again, because alt Bitcoin pairs are still off their range lows. And I just remember last cycle, alt Bitcoin pairs rallying to 0.39, right? Exactly where they are right now in November of the halving year. They topped out a week from now. And then we saw Bitcoin dominance take over one final time. So I would keep that in the back of your mind, as we sort of look at the end of the year. And to remember that the social risk, right? I mean, it's made up of a lot of different things. One of them is YouTube subscribers, right? I haven't shown you guys that one yet. But if you look at new subscribers to these YouTube channels, you can see that it's gone up a lot recently, right? I mean, you can see there's been a big spike recently. So, there are new people coming into the Cryptoverse, right? The question is, will it be sustained? That is the biggest question. And if you look at Twitter, right, if you look at followers to new followers to various analysts on Twitter who talk about the Cryptoverse, and we just look to see, how many new followers are these accounts collectively getting, there has been a spike recently, right? There has been a spike recently. And so if that spike can lead into something like this, then you get your alt season. If it's just like this, then it continues to elude everyone. So hopefully you can look back now over the last 3 years and at least understand where I was coming from when I talked about Bitcoin dominance and like why preserving the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio makes absolute sense, especially during a time like this where there's very little activity. But also know that it is my base case that in the post-halving year, 2025, I do think Bitcoin dominance will go down. I don't know what's going to happen between now and then, right? I don't. I wish I did. If dominance hadn't hit 60% already, I would still be inclined to say it has to go up. But it has hit 60. My main concern, I guess there's 4 things for dominance, whether it's topped out or not. Number 1, the dollar is rallying, right? And normally when the dollar rallies, Bitcoin dominance goes up. Number 2, the long end of the yield curve is rallying. And a lot of times when the long end rallies, Bitcoin dominance goes up, as we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years. Number 3, alt Bitcoin pairs are still well off their historic lows. And I don't really consider altcoins to be anything better than oscillators at best against Bitcoin collectively. So I'm putting out this video during a week where history shows there's a good chance that alt Bitcoin pairs could still do well, right? I mean, they could, and they did well the same week in 2020. But just remember, as we get closer to December, right? As we approach December, there is a chance that Bitcoin absorbs that liquidity from the altcoin market one last time in the cycle. And if it does do that, it should lead to a pretty convincing top for Bitcoin dominance. If Bitcoin dominance does not go higher between now and, say, the second week of January, then the top is likely in for it, which is why hedging makes sense. Okay? But between now and the sort of the second week of January, it makes sense to be open-minded, right? I still think it makes sense to have most of the portfolio in Bitcoin because it is the safer play. And if, Bitcoin gives you exposure to the upside, but it also minimizes your downside risk, right? So if there is a drop, if the market diverges for whatever reason, Bitcoin should hold up better than everything else, which could happen, right? I mean, there were some drops in late 2020 where altcoins sold off, but Bitcoin didn't sell off as badly. And then as you get into 2025, then I do think Bitcoin dominance will start to go down. The question, though, is why does it go down, right? Why does it go down? Does it go down because people are coming back to the Cryptoverse? Or does it go down because, Bitcoin is, or does it go down because, say, QE returns, right? I mean, when QE returned in 2019, the market sort of stalled out for a few months before picking back up. So it might depend on monetary policy to some degree. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if new people come back to the Cryptoverse or not. Certainly some people are coming back right now, right? I mean, you can see it on the chart. It's pretty clearly there. Is it sustained? Is it sustained? And remember, every single time we've seen it over the last 3 years, it has not been sustained. And it was these people calling for alt season every single time that basically likely kept losing value to Bitcoin because they kept chasing the latest and shiniest altcoin. Here we are, near the end of 2024, and Bitcoin dominance never really stopped going up. But I do think it will go down next year. Anyways, that is the video for you today on the social risk. If you guys like this chart, remember you can get access to it at intothecryptoverse.com. We do have the sale going on. Make sure you check that out. Lock in the low rate, subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.